This program is made possible in part by Nebraskans for Public Television. Consider This, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bales Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome to the first official show of Season 5 of Consider This at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. We've really enjoyed doing it here in the Student Center. We have a real feel for the university. It's good news and bad news that we are doing an extremely topical show. This is a show today that we all kind of wished we weren't doing, but if we have to do it, we're really glad we have the guests we do. I'd like to introduce those guests. Scott Terry is an associate professor here at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. He's kind of he's kind of bi. He's a public administration professor, but he works in the UNO Aviation Institute, and his specialty is airline management, airport administration, these kinds of things. With us also from the UNO Aviation Institute, which by the way just finished celebrating its 10th year on the campus, is Michaela Schaff. She is a senior research associate with the Institute, and she teaches a class on airport security. And had the opportunity to talk to both of them. This is a time of probably unparalleled concern in the industry. You couple the September 11th horrific set of events, which involved planes, and a soft economy where the airlines were kind of having some problems anyway, and then now it's even worse. Let me start with you first. How would you just describe the state of the airline industry right now?
Well, I think you really need to go back before, even to last year, when the airlines themselves were doing fairly well financially. We had a situation where our main concerns were about congestion, delays, and all was not well in the industry, and yet business was good enough that the airlines were making a lot of money. But there was a certain amount of concern that whether we had enough airport capacity, whether our airspace, air traffic control system was where it should be technologically and in terms of personnel. So hot on the heels of that came an economic slowdown, where we still had the congestion and delay problems. Falling on top of that was the fewer business travelers, less leisure travelers, so the airlines started to feel the pinch well before September 11th. September 11th comes along, of course, and radically alters the business, grounding the fleet for a number of days, putting a number of airports out of commission for a while, really stunning the traveling population. And
I think that's an understatement.
And we're not. All of those things now are combining to confront policymakers, the airlines, the airports themselves, and sorting that out in a reasonable fashion is the task.
That's almost a situation where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Yeah. Any one of those things or two of those things, and then you put it together, it's not just adding up those things. It's greater. It's greater, the net effect. Let's talk about security in the airports, which obviously is the first thing on this whole trip of what happened September 11th. I mean, you have to get into the airport before you get up into the sky. And you told me a story of how the day before, on September 10th, you handed something out to your class.
Yes, I gave them a reading assignment to do, and the article was entitled, "Americans are increasingly favored as terrorist targets." They thought
Did your students freak?
They were very concerned about what I knew, actually, when we came back to class on Wednesday. They wanted to make sure where I was on Tuesday, that I had nothing, obviously, no foresight on that. It's a topic that we had planned about talking about in class. The timing was just coincidental with the September 11th attack.
Now, you can take any set of circumstances, be they economic or just the situation with security in the airports, and you can finger point, and there were events in the last decade and a half in the airline industry where they did say we really need to do something about security, and then kind of.
Sure. In 1988, Pan Am 103 blew up over Lockerbie. It was bombed. We had a presidential commission formed. They implemented a few of those recommendations. 1996, we saw TWA 800. Initially, there was concern about it being a terrorist attack. Formed another presidential commission, established many more of those same recommendations, implemented some again. But what we really see is complacency set in. Sense of security sets in as time passes and things get back to normal. And of course, we need some long-term vigilance in security, some long-term measures so that complacency doesn't set in.
That's human nature, though. That's the thing that gets us through tragedy, is
Right.
having time and distance.
Right.
But it also lets us forget that, quote, lessons. Because I'm a parent, and I always say that.
Right.
The lesson of it. But and then I have been concerned for some time, and I'm glad I don't really know too much about it, about the kind of corollary to the security is the whole air traffic control system. Was horribly outdated before. Old computers. I mean, I don't know a lot about computers, but what I had read from very good sources is that it had already pushed the envelope. Is that a safe
Well,
statement?
I think the thing is, before this latest terrorist incident, the largest or the primary concern that people watching the industry had was that with our problems in air traffic control and the congestion around major airports such as the Chicago airspace or New York airspace, was that we would suffer a catastrophic mid-air collision that would have nothing to do with terrorists, but really about the way our airspace is being managed, that we're putting too many planes in the same airspace to serve the airline's interest, the interests of the consumer that want to fly out of those areas. But that was the primary concern, and I think that's why we learn from things like the Lockerbie bombing and TWA 800 and so forth, but there are so many other things that are begging the attention of policymakers and for the money that's available. And so we to the extent money was being spent in aviation, it was being spent on modernizing air traffic control and improving airport capacity,
Right.
or at least attempting
New runways.
to. Right.
I think Omaha is a beneficiary of some of that. Well, let's talk about the money and where it would come. There's no question that even prior to this, there was going to have to be some money spent if you just take the air traffic control system alone. You told me at an earlier time we talked that there is an aviation trust fund. It's not an endless supply, but there's a chunk of change.
Mm-hmm.
I think roughly, not quite $10 million. They're expecting $12 billion. With a B.
Right.
By about the year 2003, the beginning of 2003. So there is some money to start this process. Is it there right now? Can we get our hands on it?
The trust fund's an interesting issue. I mean, in recent years, the trust fund became a sort of a real bugaboo for the industry, because there was this notion that the industry was paying money in through taxes and fees, and that Congress was holding the trust fund as part of the smoke and mirrors game to balance the budget.
Like the Social Security
Right,
Trust
that
Fund,
you could-
a bunch of IOUs.
If you can count the trust fund against the on the budget and against the deficit, you have this large chunk of money that you can say, hey, we're actually doing a good job with fiscal management. But that money is coming in from aviation and is earmarked for aviation. So the money, Congress was saying, let's spend some money on aviation, and they were authorizing expenditures, but they weren't appropriating the money. And so that certainly held it up. That has changed slightly with the recent legislation, the Air 21 Act, which was designed to it didn't remove this from the budget and put it off budget, but it made it more difficult to hold that money in the trust fund. But it's not, if you think about the dollar amounts for aviation, if you look at any of the major airports with capital improvement programs, $3, $4, $5 billion for a single airport project is not uncommon.
Right.
So you distribute that money, even billions of dollars distributed around through the system, through the airports, through the air traffic control system. We need a whole lot more money.
Oh, we probably do, but at least there's a chunk of change there to begin one priority. Whoever decides what that priority is, maybe security will be the first one, and then we'll have to face. But you see a national well now, at least now, that time and distance
Right.
thing. to keep our airports safe. And we've seen a situation here in Omaha, which I think has been, I've been listening to the radio talk shows. I normally don't, but you can't help but listen these days because there's just a lot percolating. When it was revealed that security was being taken care of at Epley in Omaha by a subcontractor. Correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand it, the gates at one end, one airline has taken responsibility for. The gates at the other and another airline, then everybody pays into them.
Right.
They have hired a subcontractor, one subcontractor for all of that, who is now under Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
Right.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
And-
Right, ITS.
And
Okay.
so, I mean, that would tend to make one, you know, because people might be bolting that company,
Right.
and you'd get new people in, and so I was relatively secure, but that one raises just another one of those little question marks that
Right.
makes you wonder about the complete overhaul that might be necessary to really make me feel as secure as I'd like to feel right now.
Right.
I'm relatively secure.
Michaela might be able to speak to this a little bit, but I think this is one of the things that immediately came up when there was people recognized in the media and otherwise that the people who executed these terrorist acts got in through the system just by, you know, they didn't sneak in. They just went in as a normal person and walked through the security screening process and walked through the system as it exists. And so it raised all the questions that have been going around in the industry for years about the quality, the training, the staffing, and so forth of these security firms.
Right. Yeah, it really is more than just the technology. There's a big element is the human element there. If the human misses what the technology is trying to show them, it's how the human interprets that technology, the images that are shown, the profiling that's done, and if the human misses those very important components and misinterprets it or misses it altogether, someone's passed through the system.
And it doesn't have to be because someone's allowing a terrorist through. It can just be and sometimes it's a group of things. I've been through X-ray scanners and bomb, you know, where they look for the residue and all that at national political conventions of the two parties, and the intensity of the people who were working there. Now, granted, there was some Secret Service around and everything, and they were being watched pretty carefully, but there was an intensity, and there was something that I've never seen in all the times I've traveled. Don't travel as much as you aviation folks do, but where they would call another person in to look at something very often. You know, this is an unusual shape to them. I mean, like a curling iron is, you know, one of those that, or an eyelash curler is another one that one had never seen before, and so. Kind of freaked him out.
Right.
But the intensity was there, and I felt really secure walking into this huge stadium where a president was going to be that they had locked down. But
well, if you think about that analogy, it's an interesting one. I attended an event where the president was there, and just the onerous security procedures. If you were to institute those at an airport,
would people put up with it?
Would people put up with it? Would we see people who are on the edge of making a decision whether they want to travel by air or not, go through with it if it's added. Now, at sort of low volume airports with the appropriate amount of staffing and security screening points, the time might not be a problem. It might still be a little invasive for some people, but at high volume, very busy airports, that could.
I would want my
really
underwear
become an
gone
issue.
through. I mean, this is a thing, you know, and it's not like I'm personally kind of a wuss but I was watching them on one of the first days back at Epley, and they had that set up makeshift tables, you know, those kind of banquet tables with the wood on top that they usually cover with tablecloths. And they were going through, this man had all his, you know, starch shirts folded by the launderers, and they were looking in him and everything, and he wasn't too bad out of shape, but again, there were only 4 other people getting on that flight at that particular time. Now it's increased since then. And so he was slightly bothered by it, but a little amused because of the novelty of it. And this poor kid had just learning how to do this.
Right.
But the law of diminishing returns is a law that's generally used in economics, is certainly applicable to this. That we are going to see diminishing returns as a consumer. I mean, in our heart of hearts, we want security.
Right.
But we're thinking time time, got to get done, you know,
Right.
the
I
kids are
think-
crying here.
Yeah, I think if you go to the airport now, you see people who are. I flew out of Kansas City last week and watched people have small, little bladed items confiscated or being sent back to go check them through, and I was kind of surprised, but people were fairly good-natured about it. But I think that over time, people will start to say, as if this persists, that do we really need to go through this? Do we really need even additional security precautions that might be implemented? And that will affect how people think of that trade-off that you're talking about.
Well, at that point, don't they say we demand more people to do this? I mean,
It might.
assuming that there has to be some pretty tough security, at least in the near future, if nothing else, to make the people that are so desperately needed right now in the industry to fly on these planes to feel secure. It's going to take more people and probably a little higher salary, and so it is going to cost more.
Right.
Now I'm hearing that, at least in the short run, people are saying, I'm willing to pay a surcharge for my personal security and probably so you can speed it up a little bit.
Right.
Do you think that's going to kind of be the way it goes, maybe?
If there's additional training, the training's going to be the key, and overcoming this high turnover of the screeners. With the high turnover in some airports, 400% in a year turnover. I think that was St. Louis 2 years ago. They had 400% turnover in their screeners in that year. What they're doing is they're bringing in new people who aren't as fast and aren't as expedient, and therefore it takes a lot longer for the passengers to make it through the security checkpoint. If we can reduce that turnover, and if we can increase the salaries and increase the training of the individuals on the job, we're going to have an expedient security checkpoint screening process.
Make them, in a sense, more of a professional.
Right.
With maybe a professional attitude and a little better salary to make them
Right.
feel that.
Really, aviation security in our country is the only place where we've delegated law enforcement to a private company.
Interesting. About the industry, though, the whole state of the thing, and obviously someone is going to look at this. Is someone going to take the bull by the horns and decide how we're going to approach air traffic control, and the other issues, the security? The day we're taping this, President Bush is announcing his new concepts for airline security, which will not, as I understand, include pilots with guns.
Right.
But
Right.
that's but the whole retinue of things are going to cost. But it's also going to take a national will, and it's going to take leadership at some level who has respect from Congress.
Well, there's a problem in the aviation industry, and that is, there's a number of problems, but that's maybe perhaps the root of why we have a difficult time solving any of these outstanding issues, where everybody could sit around the table and say, this is definitely an issue, somebody ought to solve it. It's always the other guy should solve it, or at least the other guy should pay for it.
Right.
And you have a number of different constituencies that are well organized in the aviation industry, well represented in Washington, well represented throughout the country in the community, and they are very cautious about agreeing to things that they perceive will put the burden on them. And a good example of that is the airports and airlines frequently battle over who should pay for what and who should be allowed to do what. The airlines frequently battle with you throw the air traffic controllers in there, the general aviation community, the small aircraft owners and operators. They're vigilantly watching to see what will Congress do to regarding security or congestion or
Well, and
anything
they're
else.
working on really small profit margins.
The airlines are working on really small profit margins too. I
Yeah.
mean, generally the margins are fairly slim in the airline industry, and that's hard for people to stomach sometimes, seeing the executive compensation rates and some of the other things, and the things that when the airlines are doing well, they are making a lot of money, but it's a very cyclical industry, and it's an industry that things do even out in a fairly thin manner over time.
Okay, what do you think there will be any feel for pushing that security? I mean, the FAA air traffic control is already under federal jurisdiction, but the whole thing be put, and then if there were a surtax or something, assuming, and put into some fund, maybe the trust fund or whatever, and we knew what it was going to cost, and we were going to pay for it over the long term. I don't mind paying my share if I'm going to fly. But do we have the will to say that we are going to federalize this, and that we've got a Republican president who, bless his heart, has had a really tough job,
Yes. without a
but
doubt.
they don't tend to want more
More government.
federalization.
Right.
Europe, a lot of the countries in Europe do this. Certainly Israel takes responsibility. I mean, if you could predict, what do you think should and might happen?
Well, what was announced today was a combination of federal and non-federal working together, workers working together to implement the security screening process. I think that that's a good start. Right now at the Category X, or the 18, 19 largest airports in the country, we have federal security managers that are there, paid for by the FAA at these.
Were they at Boston?
Yes, they were. Yes, they were. To look at oversight of the screening and coordinating the federal security measures that are supposed to be there. I think we're going to start to see that a lot more at the Category 1 airports now, and eventually at the 470 commercial service airports in the country. It's a start, but the president at this point isn't willing to entertain nationalizing all of screeners, and with that's going to come, or I should say with that is not going to come additional training. We're not going to see the additional
Mandated.
trainings of the private companies.
Well, it's a catch-22. I mean, it really is. In this country, we don't tend to federalize things as a matter of course, for a lot of reasons. Money being which is one, taxes, money. But now we've got a possible bailout. I mean, we have done some bailout.
Right.
And we might have more. I expect to see something more. That's an issue too.
Well, there's a considerable amount of money that's going to be funneling to the air carriers. Those carriers are going to be hard pressed if things continue the way they are. Now, the assumption is that things will improve. Enplanements or people boarding planes, buying tickets will come back. I don't think any reasonable person says nobody's going to fly anymore.
But
People
we
will
could
come
end
back.
up a shake out of this with fewer airlines. As
Could, but,
competition.
but before we get to that, there's also the other side of this is what's our foreign policy heading towards now. And if we undertake any sort of military action, all you have to do is look at the history of military action and the airline industry. And the airline industry, people will stop flying. In this case especially, because the military action is likely to be involved in areas where people would fear retaliation or would fear some response directed at the airline industry or anything else. And so whenever there's conflict in the system, and if that conflict could lead to higher oil prices, which is always a possibility, so many things that can come on the heels of an already difficult situation that could hit the airline industry pretty hard.
Okay, if you guys were independently or together, you can put your heads together on this, or you can answer individually. The air czars
Oh boy.
of U.S. air transportation business, what would be the first 3 things you would do?
Money not a concern?
Oh, now you got this.
Yeah,
All right, let's do it. Money not a concern theoretical,
okay.
which we know isn't the real world at all. But
Right.
Well, I advocated for some money going to the airline industry, and I think that it is a good idea for us as a society or as a country to make sure that our airline industry does not fall apart. The problem with that, though, and there's some obvious problems, is that the perceptions of the airline industry is, one, that they don't care about the consumer, that service has deteriorated, that the airline industry is not really worried about its role as a transportation service, but as a profit generator, that pilots, new contracts for a lot of pilots of the major airlines have given them astronomical salaries that the common people can't even imagine. And then the salaries of the executives of even airlines that are losing money,
$11 million.
$11 million a year, and we've seen some good signs. One, we've seen that some of the units, labor units in different airlines are talking about giving some concessions, and the executives as well for some airlines, but not all are talking about reducing their compensation.
Okay, so
in this process.
given some concessions and some real world, some realities that these companies have to deal with, you think you would prop them up to a certain degree?
To a certain degree, because I think our economy and our society relies on air travel, probably more so than any other society does. The size of our country, our connections with the global economy, it's not having that go away or be diminished substantially would really have a negative effect
Okay,
on
that's
us.
the first thing you would do. What would be the first thing you would do?
I would say overall training for not only the screeners but for the gate agents as well. We've talked about profiling system in our country, and
Which is kind of a mixed emotion right now,
yes,
but
it is. Yes, it is. But the goal of the profiling is to eliminate those passengers that are not considered a security risk, and just to focus our attention and our resources and our technology on those maybe 2 to 8% that might be a concern. That
not
just
to
might,
treat them poorly.
not to treat them poorly,
Or-
but to maybe just ask them some additional questions.
in a nice,
Further
professional way.
Exactly. Put their baggage through some further explosives detection technology systems. A little bit more scrutiny is all. Not discrimination, certainly, but we need additional training for gate agents and for the security checkpoints as well in order for that to happen.
Would you put sky marshals on every major plane for the, at least for the short term?
I think that's a perception issue. I think the public's going to feel more comfortable knowing that there are sky marshals out there dressed in plain clothes, could be the guy or gal sitting next to them. I think that's more of a public safety perception issue, and it's going to build some public confidence for travelers to get back in the air.
That's why I said at least for the short term in terms of
I'm
mixed on that?
curious about that, because to have someone that's adequately trained to do that job, and then to place an adequately trained sky marshal on each commercial flight in this country is just enormous. It's
Money-wise, it is.
just to find those people and train them and then get
And
them on
these
the
aren't minimum
aircraft.
wage people either.
They're not
even close.
They'd have to be highly trained, not just as your typical law enforcement kind of officer, but almost in a it's almost an even more delicate situation.
Psychological training,
right.
sensitivity training, negotiating training, maybe even.
It's the whole variety of things there, and that's I think that one thing to do is maybe you could, and again the perception is important here, but just to have a random process that we have a more visible Sky Marshal program. Because they're plain clothes, they may be on your plane, they may not.
I feel that there's a
Right.
darn good
That there's a
chance they're on my
right,
plane.
That there's a credible
Exactly.
program. out
Right,
there.
a credible program. Well, we're running out of time. I do want to mention, because we're at UNO, and I am a proud alum, that the Aviation Institute is home to the annual, let me get this right.
The Airline Quality Report. Right.
Yeah, and it's based here, but they share this with Wichita State, and it's a very credible and respected report. I want to thank you for joining us. We didn't solve any problems, but this is going to be ongoing, so maybe we'll
will
have
be.
you back. Scott Terry, Michaela Schaff from the UNO Aviation Institute. Serious problems and serious discussions we have to have in this public arena, so stay tuned to Consider This for that. And remember, you can see our shows on the web at unotv.unomaha.edu, so check it out. Have a good week.
This program is made possible in part by Nebraskans for Public Television.